So the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, we had invited him, and he had been on our schedule for several weeks, and unfortunately last week decided that he was not able to attend based on the world situation around him. But he did send a note acknowledging the 75th anniversary of Army Aviation and offering his best wishes to Army Aviation and to those here at the summit. His letter, together with other key letters from other key leaders, can be found in the current issue of Army Aviation magazine. But I can tell you, we have the best speaker we could possibly have for our keynote speaker. We're honored this morning to welcome to one of our own, one of the senior Army aviators in the Army, and currently the Deputy Chief of Staff, G1 for Personnel. And as many of you know, on Tuesday was nominated to become the next Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. Lieutenant General James McConville is our keynote speaker. He's a master aviator with a long career in aviation of both peace and war, and a very, very strong advocate of Army aviation. Ladies and gentlemen, General Jimmy McConville.
Well, when you started talking about the guest speaker, I thought it was someone else that was going to speak. So first of all, thanks, EJ, for your leadership. Thanks for what you do every single day. And seeing the 46 Eagle 6 up here, Drew Pappas, having served twice with him and once in combat, the 101st is in great hands. And take his counsel on what the ground maneuver commander needs, because he's one of the best ones that we have. As I look out across this forum here today, I see the giants of Army aviation. And nowadays, I tend to fly a desk. I don't get to see too much of what's going on, but I do see what our aviation is doing throughout the world. And for all those who've gone before us, you can be very, very proud of what our aviators are doing every single day throughout the world. They are really making a difference, and they stand on your shoulders. So thanks, each and every one of you, for the legacy that you have left us. I can tell you that aviation is in great hands. Bill Gaylor is going to speak a little later. We've got a great branch chief. We've got a six-pack, I guess as they call themselves, senior aviators that every single day are representing us proudly to make sure that we get the resources that we need. And I do want to recognize Colonel Kettles. He's out there. I've had a chance to meet him, and he epitomizes everything that we want in an aviator. Go to the next slide, please. We have a great Chief of Staff of the Army, a great warfighter who I've had the privilege of serving 3 times in combat with him. And he clearly understands the value of Army aviation. And I know he would rather be here today than back fighting for resources, which he has done so well in the hills. So I just want to play a quick snippet from him, and he's going to talk a little about Army aviation.
I was Deputy Commanding General for the Screaming Eagles. I love Fort Campbell, love Kentucky, and I love helicopters. I've been in a lot of firefights over the years, and my first call is to get an attack helicopter on the ground. Our G1 right now, Jim McConville, was an Apache helicopter pilot and flew a close air support mission directly for me. He saved my life, in fact. In fact, he probably regrets it today that he's a G1 and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Army.
So that's our Chief of Staff of the Army. He likes to tell the story how we saved his life. We like to tell the story we didn't know it was him. But what we mean by that, it didn't matter, because we had these great aviators who, on the battlefield, they were there to support the troops on the ground. So it didn't matter whether it was a private, a colonel, a general. The bottom line was when soldiers were in trouble, they were there for them, and that's what we're all about. Next slide. And so I'm going to talk a little about the future. In order to go to the future, some things are not going to change. And as Drew pointed out so well, we have to continue to learn, we have to continue to innovate, and we have to continue to adapt, and we cannot rest on our laurels as we move forward into the future. And really what it comes down to, it's not about fighting the last fight better. We often talk about studying history and we want to fight the last fight better. That's not what it's about at all. It's about winning the next fight. It's winning the next fight, and we got to learn from where we've been to do that. But one thing is not going to change. And one thing's not going to change about Army aviation, and that's we exist to support the troops on the ground. That will never change, and as long as we do that, we will remain relevant. We will remain relevant, and quite frankly, we will remain resource, which a lot of you are interested in. So that's what we have to do. Next slide. And you know, as we talk, this is a great place to be. We go back to our early history, the 1942, and we have these great gentlemen from World War II, and we have great aviators from Korea, but it was Vietnam where Army aviation came of age. It was Vietnam which was the first helicopter war, and we have some great Vietnam veterans here that distinguished themselves in combat. And when I think about it, I've done a little reading, and you know, you take a look at the 1st Cavalry Division. One of the commanders that pioneered air mobile combat was a Major General Kennard. And if you know his background, he was the G3 of the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. So you think about it. He understood the importance of using aerial or vertical envelopment to do things. You know, he jumped in on D-Day. And I think he was probably thinking, hey, this is great. I get in behind the enemy lines. I can jump in. But it would be pretty good if I could jump out or at least get picked up. And I think that's why he was thinking about helicopters. What we provide is we can get people in places where they can't go, but we also can come pick them up. And you know, I'm going to talk a little later about, we're going to honor Lieutenant Colonel Kettles, but there's no finer example about that, the ability for us to support commanders at the right time, the right place with the troops, and to bring out their wounded and to support them on the ground. That's what it's all about, and if you understand Colonel Kettles, if you haven't had a chance to read his citation, take the time to do it. It's absolutely incredible. I had a chance to meet Dewey Smith, and many of you probably don't know who Dewey Smith is. Dewey Smith was a specialist in the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. He was the last person that was pulled out of that LZ on the 3rd time when Lieutenant Colonel Kettles went into that LZ after he'd been shot up a bunch of times. I met him at the Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony, and he was alive because of Lieutenant Colonel Chuck Kettles. And it's an incredible thing, and that's what we do. That's what we bring to the battlefield. That's why the senior ground maneuver commanders are willing to resource us, and that's what we exist for. Next slide. And so over the years, you take a look at the history, and we move from Vietnam, and we move into Desert Storm. But a lot of things happened in the 80s. We had this organization called the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And people like General Brown and General Daly is here, and I know there's a lot of great warrant officers and NCOs out here. You led the way. You looked back at Vietnam. You took the lessons learned. You innovated, and you adapted. Because of you, we started flying night vision goggles. We learned how to do long-range navigation. We learned how to operate in the urban environment. We learned how to do precision shooting. You adapted your helicopters, a whole bunch of things. You did some incredible things, but not only did you do it for the mission, what you did was you brought that in to the conventional aviation force. And if you go around today to a lot of these organizations, they're flying at a credible high level of excellence because of the 160th Special Operations Regiment. So thank you very much. And then it was Desert Storm. And Desert Storm was important because we had this thing called air-land battle doctrine. And it all came together at Desert Storm. And at Desert Storm, helicopters, the Apache helicopter, 1st and 101st, under then Lieutenant Colonel Cody, fired the first shots of Desert Storm. And very, very important mission. And then our forces basically showed why air-land battle was such a great doctrine. We were in an open terrain, a linear battlefield, and we just destroyed the Iraqi army. And one of the lessons was no one would fight us like that again. And so when we came out of Desert Storm, we needed to think. We needed to learn. We needed to innovate and adapt. Next slide. And so then came OEF and OIF. And some were trying to use the same tactics, techniques, and procedures that we used during Desert Storm. We quickly learned that it was a different environment. The threat was different. Collateral damage was different. Discrimination was very hard because you couldn't see the enemy. They weren't in the desert. They weren't in open terrain. They were hiding places like Fallujah and Sardis City. They were in the mountains. They closely had themselves aligned with civilians. So there's always that potential of civilian casualties. But we adapted. CW2, Cindy Roselle's shown right there. She was serving in the 1st of 227 Attack Helicopter Regiment. Received a call from then a Major General Dempsey and a Brigadier General called Scapriardi, and he said that Najaf was being overrun, and could we get helicopters down there? Cindy Roselle in 35 minutes, because we had innovated, we had moving map display with GPS, we had folks that could take mission command, was there in 35 minutes. Her team was engaging in 35 minutes from Baghdad in Najaf and basically saved the lives of a bunch of soldiers who would have been overrun. Learning, innovating, and adapting. Next slide. And so this is kind of where we're coming out of, at least what we've been doing in OEF and OIF. We've changed the way we fight. We're doing a lot of lethal agile teams. We're always going to be integrated with the ground force. Many of us are using high energy tactics, threat-based altitude, because we don't have that much of a threat. We don't have that much of an air defense threat. So we have a generation of aviators who have grown up this way. They're used to doing decentralized execution, and they become strategic junior leaders. So as we look next, and we go into the next fight, we need to learn, we need to innovate, and we need to adapt. Next slide. Because here's the future fight. The future fight is going to be different. And we're watching this right now. The next fight could be against a near peer. And it's going to be a higher threat. And so we can't look to the history and say, hey, we're going to continue the fight like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, we need to start changing the way we think about it right now. You know, as far as change the way to fight, we'll always be with the ground force. But think about fighting in a highly urbanized environment. We've done some of this in Iraq, but think about, look at the world, what's going on right now. Look at these mega cities where we're going to have to fight. And we're going to have to change the way we fight so we can do that. Look at what's going on with manned and unmanned and autonomous and semi-autonomous systems right now. We're going to have to change the way we fight. We're going to have to counter them, and we're going to have to use them. Because at the end of the day, you know, if we don't need to risk a pilot, we don't want to do that. If we can do it with an autonomous system, then do it with an autonomous system. We can do it semi-autonomous, we'll do it with a semi-autonomous system if we can make that happen. And we're talking a lot about cross-domain. The domains have changed. We think the future fight is not going to be just air-land. We're going to have to address it in sea, we're going to have to address it in cyber, we're going to have to address it in space, and we're starting to look at things very, very differently on how we're doing that. You listen to what the Navy's talking about right now. The Army may lead with long-range fires to open up some space in some denied area so they can get in there. We're going to change. How we fly. Many of our aviators have been flying, used to doing high-energy tactics. That may not work. Used to flying high. That may not work. We may change. We're doing man-unmanned teaming right now, but that may change too. We got issues with swarming. We're going to have to figure out the enemy is going to go to our weaknesses. So we got to think about how we do that and then how we fight in the degraded environments. And the way we think, we see the battlefield being very dispersed. We saw Ukraine where units massed and they were quickly taken out by artillery. We're going to have to disperse. And that's going to require us to have junior leaders that can operate. We're very dependent on certain systems. We may not have them in the future, so we got to be able to deal with that. And again, the semi-autonomous and autonomous execution, we're very concerned about that, and as we move in the future, we're going to have to deal with that as we go forward. Next slide. So what's future aviation going to need? We got great systems. We have the best attack helicopters, the assault helicopters, and medium-lift helicopters in the world. I've seen them in combat. They're unbelievable, but they're good for today. As we go into the future, we need to protect them. General Pappas is not going to want to send a Chinook with 35 Screaming Eagles on it if we can't protect that helicopter. If we can't move around the battlefield and be protected, our aircraft are not going to be the value they stand today. So we have to think through that, take a look at what the future threats are, and make sure we can address them. Because we should not assume that what we're seeing today is what we're going to see in the future, and we should not assume what we're seeing today is going to be what we may go to if we get in another conflict. We need future vertical lift. There's no question about that. What we have today is good for today, and we've done some great stuff, iterative, going from alpha models to Delta, Echo, Fox, Mikes, and we got great helicopters, but we need to make sure as we go into the future, we have future vertical lift. And then one thing I would suggest, recommend, and ask, when we look at future vertical lift, and as we design it, think about designing it the same way we plan in air assault, from the objective back. Let's take a look at what that ground maneuver commander wants, how many people he wants on it. Let's take a look at the agility that he needs at that landing zone, that X, that Y, whatever we want to call it, whatever you're doing it. So that's where we put our priority. I'm all for, and I'm a Navy as I say that, reducing pilot workload. But at the end of the day, it's about that infantry commander, what he needs in that aircraft to get the mission done, and so we need to do that. So we're going to, as we look in the future, the lethality, the reach protection, the agility and the objectives can be absolutely key. We're going to have to think about how we worked with unmanned aerial systems. You know, you look around the country, what's going on in the civilian sector right now, we're going to be driving around in autonomous vehicles. We've got little helicopters being developed where people can, for Uber and taxiing. So we should assume that the battlefield is going to be no different. And so we have to think through how we do that, and we can't let, I want to say, egos get in the way that we have to be there with man and those type things. We just need to think our way through it. In some ways, we've lost the ability to be expeditionary. And we've been going to Iraq, we've been going to Afghanistan. We have very fixed facilities. We have stadium-size command and control nodes, and people have gotten used to dealing that way. We do maintenance and sustainment operations on fixed runways and airports and those type things. We've got to make sure that we can go back to what it's like to be expeditionary. We can sustain ourselves with internal units and without help. And not that we don't want other people to help, but we need to be able to do that internally as we go forward. And the last thing is this overmatch in soldiers. I mean, at the end of the day, we have some pretty expensive equipment. But what makes us the best is our soldiers, non-commissioned officers, warrant officers, and officers. And we're going to continue to do that as we go forward. And they're our most important asset. Go to the next slide. So when we think about it, as far as in being the G1, we are moving from a industrial age personnel management system to a 21st century talent management system. And what that means is, if you look at how we manage people right now, we basically do is we manage them by two variables. You're a CW3 of Apache pilot, or you're a captain of infantry, but there's so much more that we want to know about you. There's so much more that we want to make sure we understand. What are your knowledge? What are your skills? What are your attributes? What are your behaviors? And we may even want to know your desires, which some people think is blasphemous. And we may know what you want to do and where you want to go, because we know if you get a chance to do that, you will do the best at it. And so we're going to do that. And interesting enough, we've taken a look at how we're going to incentivize in the future. We're putting a system in place that's going to allow us to do that. And so as we looked at, we took one unit, and they have different categories of people. From where I'm at, if you're a CW3 co-pilot, maybe we don't compensate you the same way that we compensate a CW3 SP that's doing certain type things. And we've done a pilot with one organization, and we kind of went through maybe basic mission qualified, fully mission qualified, flight lead, SP, and depending on really your talents or your skills, is how you're compensated within a rank structure. In the future, we may even promote you based on your talents as we move forward. But this is a different way of thinking. It's not an industrial age round peg that goes into a round hole. The other thing is, we're going to have all three components, the regular Army, the active Army, the National Guard, and reserves on one personnel system, which is really a big deal. If you think about it right now, we have three different personnel systems for each of the components. So if you're the G1 in the Army, you can't see about 50% of the force. And we have incredible talent in our National Guard and reserves that we want to know where it is and what they have. And even more so, when we take a look at our National Guard and reserves, sometimes their talents are masked by their rank in MOS. When we're in Afghanistan, I had the National Guard units and reserve units actually tell me on an analog spreadsheet what their talents actually were. And I found out we had a supply sergeant that owned a designing firm. We found out that we had an S3 that ran the Texas Highway Department. So guess what? They weren't doing that anymore. They were building roads and designing stuff. And that's what talent management is about. And what we believe is if we got the right people in the right job, we're going to be a much better Army. And as we move to things like cyber, where technical skills really matter, where talents really matter, we need to be able to know what they are, and we need to be able to quickly identify this. When we sent Drew's former Gary Valesky to Liberia, 30 days, you're going to Liberia. It would have been nice if I could have looked across 1 million people in the Army and said, who's been to who's from Liberia, who understands that, who's dealt with epidemics, who's done these type things, and I could have turned to that commander and said, here's 50 resumes you might want to look at. They're all available, they're all here to help you. And so that's where we're going on talent management, and we think that is critically important. Next slide. Aviation NCOs. NCOs, as we go in the future, no change, NCOs are the backbone of the United States Army. And there's no change to that. And in aviation, if they did not maintain, if they did not sustain, if they did not rearm, if they did not refuel, then we have a bunch of multi-million-dollar paperweights sitting on runways. And so as we go forward in the future, we got to make sure we give them a chance to do their jobs. We got to make sure that they're highly qualified. They have the tools, they got the training, and we're actually going to give them the credentials that they need as they go forward. And again, we're going to move to a talent-based Army. Someone that has certain credentials may be incentivized to do that in the future. Next slide. My aviation warrant officers. NCOs are the backbone of the Army. Aviation warrant officers are the backbone of Army aviation. And we are very lucky, I believe, personally, we have this model. It makes us the premier aviation force, I believe, in the world. And a couple of pictures here. The first picture is, a picture, this is in the JOF. It was actually, in fact, Steve Kilgore is here. He's a Distinguished Flying Cross recipient in the 1st Cav Division. But he took this picture. And the interesting about this picture, that's my head in the front seat. So Steve's back there, he's flying upside down, he's got this colonel in the front seat, he's taking pictures, he's shooting, he's doing all this stuff. But behind every commander, there's a great warrant officer, and that was Steve Kilgore. And the other three on the bottom are just incredible warrant officers that I had the opportunity. They're all in the Hall of Fame. In fact, Carl Schmitt's going in the Hall of Fame tonight. But it's those warrant officers who have been doing this for 15, 20, 25, and 30 years that really differentiates us from the other people that fly airplanes and helicopters and other services. I think it's what makes us different. And as we go forward, we got to make sure we recognize their talents and we incentivize those who are doing the things that we need to do. Last slide. So I'll go back to where we started. I think we've got a great aviation force. I was just up at, EJ and I were up at West Point. We're watching the young cadets that are coming into the Army. We are getting the highest quality lieutenants. So if you've got lieutenants coming into your formations, you need to understand they are high quality. Most of us wouldn't qualify now as far as GPAs, but we got great folks coming in. And we got to give them an opportunity to serve. We got to get a chance to fly and develop their skill sets. And at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we are supporting that troop on the ground, continue to learn, continue to innovate, and adapt as we move in the future force. So thank you all. It's been great to be here with you. And as people have said before, we've got some great aviators and soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines downrange doing great things for this country. Appreciate Godspeed. Thank you.
thanks, Jimmy, for that great presentation, but also for taking the time to be here. And we also want to give you one of the books for the 75th anniversary and the 75th coin.